guys, I want to make this quick video today to talk about vintage citizen watches. And the main reason for this is that I've seen a few videos discussing the great value propositions that vintage Seikos represent, but I haven't seen as much focus on citizen, which I think offers just as much value in the vintage world. So I have some vintage citizen pieces here, and one thing that you can tell just by looking at these examples is that there's incredible variety to be found in this market. I mean, I've seen an unbelievable range of styles and designs in vintage citizen watches, and only half an hour's eBay surfing would let you see that you're virtually guaranteed to find many pieces that you like because there are so many to choose from. So the first thing to do before really talking about what to look for in vintage citizen watches is probably to cover a couple of things to be aware of, because there are potential liabilities with all vintage pieces, but specifically with these as well. So one quality related issue to be aware of is the fact that bracelets on vintage citizen watches, in my experience, are likely to be of very poor quality, just as with vintage Seikos. That's worth mentioning because modern citizen watches tend to be of a more consistent quality in all aspects of construction, so you might be surprised if your only experience is with modern citizen watches. Now, although you should be prepared for poor quality in the bracelets, the build quality of the watches themselves, in my experience, is consistently very good. However, there is still a significant range in quality, and some pieces will be much better than others. Now, what might be more important than the original quality of these pieces is whether they are in original condition when you buy them today. The most important decision you can make here is probably whether you absolutely need the watches to be in original condition. If they aren't, the most likely thing to have been done to them is that the dial will have been refinished, although it's possible that hands might also have been replaced and so on. Now, personally, I don't object to the prospect of getting a good deal on a watch like this because the dial's been refinished, as long as the work has been done really well. I'm certainly less wary of reconditioned Citizen or Seiko pieces than I would be of reconditioned watches from luxury brands at higher price points. For obvious reasons, you're paying more and you expect to get more for that money, and you've got more on the line. As with anything, the key here is to do the research before buying, so as long as you do know that many of these watches will have had some kind of work done on them, and you know what's acceptable to you, you should be fine. So where the designs are concerned, I've seen a lot more variety in vintage citizens than I see in modern citizens. Really, if you're looking at modern mid-range Japanese watches and you want sheer variety to choose from, Seiko is a better bet. There are two particular advantages in terms of design and aesthetics to look at with vintage citizen watches. One of them is that if you look at 70s and in some cases 80s pieces, you can get some very striking designs and unique color schemes that you would never see in modern pieces. So if these are to your taste, you can certainly get a watch that stands out next to any modern watch. The second advantage here is that, more than with vintage Seikos, you can see many slight variations on roughly the same design, making it much more likely that you'll find the perfect design for you. So, moving on to something that's less specific to vintage citizens than to vintage pieces in general, but that is certainly true of these citizen pieces. It's also worth knowing that most of these watches will be much smaller than modern pieces, and if this is what you're looking for, you can easily find extremely small pieces, such as the grey-dialed watch that I have here. Now, wrist size clearly factors in here, because as much as it annoys me having very small wrists that there are many watches that are simply too large for me to wear, the flip side of that is that small-wristed people like me can get away with wearing really any of these vintage watches. Now, as far as reliability goes, obviously that's a concern with any vintage watch. They've been around longer, there's simply been more time for wear and tear and so on. But my personal experience with citizen pieces is that they're basically like vintage Seikos, bulletproof, and generally they're incredibly durable and reliable. So with the examples that I've picked out here, you can see that there's one quartz watch, which is obviously a separate issue. You could expect that to be more reliable and simply need the battery changed from time to time. I actually bought this one because it's incredibly thin, so I use it for typing and it doesn't get in the way when I'm working on the keyboard. With the mechanical ones, not only have these watches stood up really well, I've never had any problems with them. You can't expect stunning accuracy from them, obviously, because in addition to being vintage pieces, they weren't super high-end watches to high specifications in the first place. But in addition to simply having had these watches for a few years and they're still running fine, I've actually taken the movements out of most of them in the process of replacing crystals and so on and put them back in. And I'm by no means an expert at watch repair or anything like that, so if they were able to stand up to me tinkering with them, then I have really high confidence in their durability in general. So guys, that was just a really quick video to let you know that these watches are out there and that I highly recommend them, just to raise some awareness. Please let me know about any experiences you've had with these vintage Citizens or vintage pieces in general, and I'll see you in the next video.